So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project monthly webinar. My name is Kirsten Bayer, and I am with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University. I'm excited to bring back Amy Gravino to you all. We were joined with, she presented for us last spring on a very influential topic, and then on last July as well. And then we are also bringing her back as our keynote speaker for our autism conference, which is going to be in April. And I can put the registration just went out for that. So I will put that in the link. Or I'll put the link in the chat for all of you. If any of you are interested, it's going to be at Illinois State University in Bloomington Normal. And any educators, teachers, parents, administrators are all invited to come to it. So we're very excited about that. Today, we're going to be hearing from Amy speak about entering into adulthood with autism, what we know, and what we still need to learn about it. And so she's giving her personal perspective on that topic. Again, my name is Kirsten Bayer. I'm the Assistant Director of Communications here at ICSPS. Here's my email and phone number. If you need to reach me following the session, feel free to do so. A little bit about the Autism Training and Technical Assistance Project and just who we are. If you're not familiar with our project, we are funded by the Illinois State Board of Education, and we are a very niche in our center's scope of work, and the fact that we develop and present resources that assist specifically with the transitional period of an individual with autism or autistic individual's life as they're transitioning from secondary education to post-secondary education, or as they're transitioning from secondary education to the workforce. So we focus on providing supports and resources and advocating for that transitional piece. So we're very niche. And we work with stakeholders, employers, CBOs, parents, post-secondary and secondary educators and administrators. We work with the individuals with autism and autistic individuals themselves. So we are trying to hit all of our stakeholders, but also very niche in our scope of work. And I'm going to use individuals with autism or autistic individuals interchangeably throughout today. So just a disclaimer there. A little bit about ICSPS and who we are. We have been in the Educational Administration and Foundations Department at Illinois State University since 1977. We are housed in the College of Ed, where we have remained thus far. Our mission is really to support the success of every learner. And so that's where this project, our ADA project, really comes in and is very close, near and dear to our heart. And we provide comprehensive application of research-based practices. We provide professional development to educators and administrators, as well as to parents and other CBOs and employers. We provide a lot of professional development to employers who are looking to hire autistic individuals. And we develop resources and just really try to focus on providing equity, access, diversity, and inclusion in terms of recruitment, retention, completion, and transition. So again, this ADA project specifically focuses on the transitional piece. Here's our website, autismcollegeandcareer.com. This is where you can find the recording from today, as well as all of our past professional development that we've done and resources. And it's organized. The website is organized by stakeholders. So you would pick, you're a parent or you're a secondary educator, whatever. And then we have all of the professional development and resources provided for you on there. Again, we are funded by the ISB, or the Illinois State Board of Education, is who funds this project, which is great. And then I want to just do some beginning polls that we do for just our analytical purposes every ADA webinar. And so our first poll is just, where are you located? So Chicago, Northern Illinois, Central Illinois, Southern Illinois, or statewide should be up on your screen now. And you should be able to answer that. So I'll give everyone a couple more seconds to answer that one. And then also just a disclaimer for today, while you guys are answering that poll, is that we are on Zoom webinar. We are not on Zoom meeting. And so it is a different platform. You as an attendee will notice that you do not have your microphone or video capabilities, but you can speak, converse, and conversate with our speaker if you have questions. You can use the chat. And let me make sure, everyone can chat now. I had it closed down, so I apologize. Everyone can use the chat, so feel free to say good morning to us. and introduce yourself. We welcome that. And let me go ahead and end this poll and share the results. We have a lot of people from Chicago and North and Central Illinois, so welcome. Thank you. And then let me pull up the second poll, which is, let me see if I can find it. We have lots of polls on here. Oh, okay. I should have done this poll. So this is both of the polls together. So I apologize. The first question is, which region are you located in? So you can go ahead and answer that again if you want to. So I apologize for that. And then the second poll is, which ADA stakeholder do you best represent? And the second poll that's on there, you can scroll down and answer it. It is multiple choice. So feel free to, like, if you're a parent, but you're also a secondary educator, feel free to answer both of those. But again, like I said, we are on the Zoom webinar platform, so you can feel free to type in the chat or the Q&A if you have questions or comments or concerns or anything that you might need. And then also, towards the end of the session, if we have time for Q&A, you can raise your hand and I can actually unmute you if you would like to participate live. So we do have that capability as well. And then today's webinar is being recorded and will be up on our website within about 48 working business hours, along with Amy Corvino's slides from today, if you would like to access that following the session. And we will also have a follow-up email go out tomorrow, which will have the link to the website in it, as well as a follow-up survey. And we would love your feedback. And we really do welcome it. We have a autism plan or an ADA webinar professional development planning committee that is has parents, it has educators, administrators, CBOs, and an employer on it. And they bring us and we discuss all of professional development for planning for the whole year and speakers and who that's going to be and who's going to execute it. So we do welcome your opinion and what the field really needs in professional development. So please fill out that follow-up survey so we can really meet the field where you guys are at. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll, share the results. So it looks like, again, I already kind of knew that most of you are from like up north, which is great. And we have a couple central and southern Illinoisans too. It's always good to see we're reaching the full state, because that is who we're trying to reach, is everyone across the state. And then we have a lot of post-secondary and secondary educators. We have a couple students and young adults, which is awesome. A couple community members, some family members, and 2 employers on with us today, which is great. To hear. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and Amy, you can go ahead and share whenever you're ready. And if anyone needs anything during today's webinar, feel free to reach out to me via the chat or the Q&A. And we also have closed captioning on today. So if you need that for accessibility reasons or for note-taking purposes, feel free to turn the closed captioning on. And Amy, I'll hand it off to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kirsten. Really appreciate it. Well, good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here today. I'm going to go ahead and put this into slideshow mode, of course. So this is, I'm happy to be back. By the way, thank you, Ata, for having me back again after last year's webinars. And I'm looking forward to delivering the keynote at this year's conference. I hope to see some of you there. I hope to see all of you there. If you can make it on April 3rd, it'll be a very good time. But today we're not going to be talking about sex for once in my life. Today we're going to be shifting gears and talking about adulthood. Certainly that's a component of it, but there are many aspects, especially when we're talking about autism and autistic individuals. So there is much that we still have to learn, obviously, as we know, and we're going to find out the reasons for that and maybe what we can do to smooth that transition for autistic individuals, the individuals that you support, or if you're someone who is on the spectrum, you probably will resonate with some of this as I talk about my experiences. And I'm hoping that, this will be an enriching presentation that you will get a lot out of today. So as Kirsten said, please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature. If you have any questions, put those in there and we'll make sure we'll be keeping track of those. And we'll make sure to get to those at the end. You can also use the chat feature. If you have any comments, please feel free to interject with any thoughts you might have. I'm happy to hear from you. And so here we go. So several years ago, well, more than several now, I was contacted by a woman who was the parent of a 9-year-old girl on the spectrum, and she'd just been newly diagnosed. And this woman was a reader of my blog, and she said to me, what you should do is write a letter to your younger self as a way of giving advice to all the other, young people on the spectrum there, because they didn't know any older, not old, but older women on the spectrum. And so at her suggestion, I decided to do exactly that. And I'd like to read that to you to bring you into my world uh, when I was first diagnosed with autism at the age of 11. Dear Amy, I know you're feeling pretty bad right now. The other kids make fun of you a lot, and you don't know why. You're trying really hard to be friends with them, doing all the things you think they want you to do, and it's just not working. But there is one thing you should know. It's not your fault. Other people might say that, and you won't be able to listen to them, but I'm hoping that you will if it's coming from me. It's not your fault. Say that over and over in your head when you feel the worst, because that's when you're going to need it the most. It's not your fault. How can it not be your fault? You'll say to yourself as the next few years go by. Everyone else can do this, can make friends and be normal. Why can't you? That's just one of the many questions I know you have, questions you don't know how or are afraid to ask. They make you feel overwhelmed, like sitting in Mrs. St. Pierre's class every day, fidgeting nervously in your seat. You always get up during class to sharpen your pencil, and it's because you enjoy the smell when they're freshly sharpened. It calms you down. So don't feel bad if the other kids snicker or laugh when you smell your pencil. They just don't understand. But you care a lot about what the other kids think of you. I know you hate going to pool every week because you have to change in the locker room, and the girls make fun of your feet. This will cause you not to feel comfortable wearing flip-flops for many years, and you won't be okay with wearing them again until you're much older. It's going to be like that with a lot of things people say to you in school. Their exact words will fade from memory, but the effects they have on you will last a long time. But don't worry. One day you're going to make friends with someone who really loves your feet and will call your little toe, the one that didn't grow in quite right, your lucky toe. That's something you feel like you could use a lot of right now. Luck. You keep hoping things will get better, but they never do. I have some good news, though. You won't lose that hope. No matter what happens, you'll still be optimistic. Foolishly, maybe, but when you're older, people will tell you how wonderful it is that you are that way. But I have to be honest with you, things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. You'll be in junior high school soon, and you don't know it, but seventh and eighth grades will be two of the worst years of your life. Once again, it's not your fault. You like to look at things outside the window. The trees and blue sky make you feel calm. One day you'll be in study hall, and you'll go right up to the window and stick your head out of it. That's when someone will tell you to jump. Other voices will join in, and even after the teacher finally tells everyone to be quiet and calms things down, you'll hear them in your head for a long time to come. Every day, someone will make you feel less, not human, unwanted, and you'll keep your head down and take it because no one's going to tell you anything different. But I will. You're not less, Amy. You're more. More because you have to work twice as hard as everyone else to make your voice heard. You don't know how to fight right now, except for when you lash out after not being able to handle the pain anymore, and then it's you who gets into trouble rather than your bullies. They know how not to be seen and to avoid detection. You don't. Even as an adult, you won't quite fully master the art of subtlety, but right now you're bared to the world, completely vulnerable, and your classmates are taking full advantage of that. They know how to hurt you in the worst ways so they can get their kicks from your reactions. You can't understand what they're doing, and you just play straight into their hands every time. Once more, it's not your fault. These days, your classmates call you names. Ugly, freak, psycho, loser, retard. They call you these things because they don't know you, don't care to, and don't want to. You're trying so hard to force yourself into their world with little to no success. But you will have friends one day, Amy. Better still, you won't have to fight for their friendship. They will come to you. I know how unbelievable that seems, especially since you feel like no one wants to be around you, not even your parents. But you are loved, even if you don't realize it. You just have to learn how to love yourself. There are some things you're good at, Amy, like writing. You just started writing some poems and were happy when you saw them published in the local paper. Your mom and dad sent them in for you, just in case you were wondering how that happened. Sidebar, this past year, my father nominated me for Person of the Year in that same paper, and I just found out about it a month after it happened. Full circle moment. I have 3 words of advice for you, Amy. Keep writing. Keep doing it. Right now, you write because it's an escape from the world around you, and you don't care about being good at it. But one day you won't just be writing for yourself, you'll be writing to help other people. And your writing will help people even when you don't realize it. So you've got to keep at it. It's hard to think that you're good at anything when people are constantly telling you that everything you do and are is wrong. In middle and high school, your fellow classmates will tell you to your face to kill yourself and that no one wants you around or would care if you were gone. Don't listen to them. I know it's difficult and their words will go right into you, but they aren't worth it. You are a good person, a person worth having around, and you'd make so many people sad if you were gone. The world is going to need you when you grow up, Amy, so you have to get there. You have to make it through these dark days because you're going to make a difference in the future. Someday people will want to hear what you have to say, and you won't believe it first, but it will be meaningful and wonderful. You're going to have to take a lot of crap and go through a lot of pain to get there, but I promise you it will be worth it. My time with you is now growing short, Amy. I hope that some of the things I've said have brought you comfort, or at least given you assurance that there is indeed light at the end of this tunnel. Things will get better. A lot of people will say that to you, and you'll think that they're crazy or just trying to make you feel better, but it's really honestly true. You're an incredibly special, talented girl, and right now you're toiling in obscurity, as so many great artists tend to do. But someday the world is going to see how amazing you are, and all you'll think is, where were you people when I was younger? The future seems far away, almost impossible to think about, but don't be afraid to think about it. You're not even sure if you're going to have a future, but you will. You will. And I'll say to you now 3 words you don't hear very often, even when your mother says them to you. 3 words that you'll be desperate to hear when you get older, especially from a good-looking member of the opposite sex, and that are very appropriate for Valentine's Day today, another sidebar, but seem very off in the distance right now. I love you. I love you, my younger, high-strung, spastic, uniquely wonderful self, and I'll be here waiting for you. See you in 15 years. Love and many hugs, your 26-year-old self. Okay, deep breath. So thinking about that letter, thinking about who I was at the age of 11, and here's me. This is me in the back room at my great aunt's home in New Jersey on Thanksgiving Day. Because every single Thanksgiving when I was growing up, I would get sick. Thank you, Megan. Thank you so much for that lovely comment. I really appreciate that. Like clockwork, I would be sick on Thanksgiving every year, and we wondered why for so long. And as soon as I graduated high school, it stopped. And looking back, what I think happened was that the stress that I would experience at school from the bullying that I was experiencing and everything else that was happening was so overwhelming that my body would just shut down by the time Thanksgiving rolled around. And so that bowl next to me, there's the bowl that I was throwing up in because I couldn't keep any food down. So I never ate a Thanksgiving dinner that I can actively remember growing up until I graduated high school because it stopped as soon as it happened. So how then did this girl become this woman? And this is me at the United Nations in 2018, speaking on World Autism Awareness Day. That's the question I wanted to answer, and I wanted to think about as I thought about the journey from childhood into adulthood, right? It's what people seem to overwhelmingly forget is that autistic children become autistic adults. What do you think is going to happen? And we don't have a picture of what autistic adulthood really looks like, or the picture that we do have is not a great one, which we'll talk about in just a minute. And so I wanted to think about, what did it take for me to get here? Again, that letter was written when I was 26. I'm not 26 now. I'm 40 now. And it's been a journey. The journey continues is the big thing, right? So it doesn't stop when we turn 21, when we age out of services. It certainly doesn't. But we just don't have this idea of what it looks like to age while being autistic, what it means to go through menopause while being autistic, what it means to become a senior citizen while autistic. All those things are just absent from the way we currently talk about autism, and that's a big problem. So just kind of an overview of some of the topics we'll be discussing in today's presentation. I'm going to give kind of an overview, a basic kind of look at autism and adulthood, what we currently have information-wise, what that looks like, and things of that nature. And then I'll be talking about planning for the future. So what does that mean when we talk about the future and autism? and why it can be so difficult to talk about the future when we're talking about autism. I'll also be talking about kind of the difference between interdependence and independence, which is a big distinction from my vantage, and it kind of influences as well how we think about the future. I'll also then be talking about growth and change, how we as autistic people grow and change, and what are some strategies that you as either providers, as parents, whoever you may be, what you can do to kind of help facilitate these discussions about the future and include the autistic individual that you love or support in discussions about the future. And then, of course, as I said, we'll have time for questions at the end. Again, please feel free to use the Q&A feature here in Zoom webinar. Please feel free to use the chat if you have comments. I'm happy to hear from you. You can interrupt me. It's totally cool. So that's what we're here for. So this is something I always ask when I get this presentation. And I apologize again, this is usually geared toward parents and professionals. So for my students, for my folks who are on the spectrum, I'm here with you. I'm here, and this is going to be for everybody. But this is something I like to ask. And so what's one thing? Do you want your child or your client to be a doctor? Some parents have like really specific ideas, like you're going to go to medical school and you're going to be a doctor and that's it. Right. That can be a function of cultural upbringings. It can be a function of, class upbringings and things of that nature. Another one is a lawyer, right? Some people might want their child or client to be a lawyer when they grow up. Again, not for me. I know my cousin is a lawyer. God love him. He can do it. I can't do that. I'm too honest. I'm sorry. I know that's shady against lawyers, but that's not for me. Can't do it. What about a teacher? I love my teachers. My parents are both teachers, now retired. I have great respect and admiration for teachers, certainly a noble profession. And this is usually where I see the hands all go up. This is what most people I think really want. Do you want your child or client to be happy when they grow up, right? This is when we think about, the people that we work with and we think about becoming an adult, the biggest thing, right? We hear this all the time. I want my child to be happy and safe and healthy, right? That's kind of the biggest thing. So what we're talking about when we talk about the future is not just planning for a career job that someone might have, what kind of housing situation they're going to live in. We're talking about planning for happiness, right? Happiness isn't something that just happens a lot of the time as well. When we're autistic individuals, happiness is not, a given always. As you heard from the letter that I just read, happiness was not a facet of my life growing up. And I certainly had happy moments. That's not to say that I was miserable 24/7, but my overall outlook, my overall kind of view of the world was not a happy one. Now it is. Now I'm so full of happiness, I could just burst practically, but that didn't happen without a lot of work and a lot of sweat and tears and probably some blood too, much as I don't like blood. So we're really talking about happiness here and planning for that. And how do we engineer that? So again, our current picture of autistic adulthood is not a great one, like I said. I think this is the latest statistic. This is current as of when I gave this presentation last year. Forgive me. I believe it's 1 in 36. Someone can correct me if that has changed the CDC incidence rate. But again, what we see overwhelmingly is that autism is looked at as a childhood condition, right? We don't really have an incidence number for autistic adults, I don't think. There's not so much data in that regard. And so, it's very hard when you're not a child and to exist in this world as an autistic adult, when people a lot of the time think that you shouldn't exist or that, autism is something that just ends when someone is no longer a child. But that continues to be that overwhelming dominant image. And that's also perpetuated, by the media. We see that a lot in advertisements on television. We see it a lot with the characters that are portrayed in films and on TV shows. We are starting to see that shift. But one of those images that we happen to have, which I know is about to go off the air, is the good doctor, right? That's kind of one of the images. But the thing with the good doctor, which I am not a big fan of, I watched the first season and that was kind of all I could handle. Is we have someone who would be classified as a savant, right? Someone who is a genius in many ways, but obviously struggles socially. But that's, not where most autistic people exist, right? It tends to be the case that a lot of the images that we see are of overwhelming disability or overwhelming genius. Either someone is too disabled to function and shown as an object of pity, or they're shown as being a total genius who has abilities beyond other people and is just kind of like socially challenged. Most of us exist somewhere in the middle, right? We're not all geniuses, and we're not all, profoundly disabled either. Again, disabled is not a dirty word. I want to emphasize that autism is a disability. I don't kind of cotton to the idea of autism as a superpower. I tend to feel a little uncomfortable around that because I certainly think there are strengths we all experience as autistic individuals, just as there are challenges. But there see someone only as the sum of their strengths, or only as the sum of their weaknesses. For some reason, we don't let autistic people be just human. Neurotypicals get to be human. Neurotypicals get to have strengths and weaknesses, and neither one of them completely defines them as a person. That's not so much the case for autistic individuals. So, again, what the picture looks like right now, not a great one. Approximately 35% of autistic adults go to college. That is what the current statistic, as far as I am aware. Please feel free to correct me if someone has a different number. And 15% of those are employed. So it's a very small number of autistic adults who go to college who become employed. And we could say, things are not great with employment in a lot of aspects. A lot of people who have college degrees are not finding jobs in their fields. But overwhelmingly, especially when we look at other disabilities, when we look at individuals with ADHD or OCD or other disabilities, or intellectual disabilities as well, cerebral palsy. Overwhelmingly, it's autistic adults who face unemployment in comparison to those with other disabilities. So there is at present an 85% unemployment rate for autistic adults, which is not great. It's a really big problem, but it's only the tip of that iceberg. There's much more that's happening. That's only the part that we see, but all the things that contribute to that exist below the surface there. So okay. So again, there are a lot of challenges associated with autistic adulthood. I say that as one of them, as someone who is employed at the moment, but is certainly not existing without challenges within that employment. And other areas of my life. But overwhelmingly, a lot of the supports and services that exist are still geared toward children, autistic children, or the parents of children on the autism spectrum. And again, I understand why. I think a lot of the organizations that have been started, a lot of the things that exist were started by parents because these things didn't exist. You didn't have people in the mental health field starting these things on their own. You didn't have government agencies starting a lot of these organizations. It was parents who kind of spearheaded the charge. But the disability rights movement has existed since the 1970s, and that kind of began with folks with physical disabilities, and then it evolved and came to grow and include individuals with developmental disabilities. I think more in the 90s, I would say. But it's been a fraught and contentious thing with kind of incorporating the voices of developmentally disabled and autistic adults in an arena that has been overwhelmingly dominated by parents for so many years. And I can't help thinking some of that could be an element of denial, parents not wanting to think that their autistic child is going to become an autistic adult. That's a big problem, right? But it just overwhelmingly it makes it so much harder for those of us who've been here all along. We're not the children who are turning into autistic adults now. We're the autistic adults who've been here, for a long time. And when I was an autistic child, these things didn't exist either. So it was it's very interesting how I'm experiencing different kind of forms of isolation, from when I was a child versus to an adult, and they're different, but they're both challenging in their own ways. So, and even autism-centric spaces, like I was saying, are always not accessible to autistic adults. It just kind of ends up being this. I mean, just thinking even from like a financial perspective, how many conferences are autism conferences, and they charge extremely exorbitant, registration fees, and then you have travel costs, and it becomes prohibitive for autistic adults to actually go to autism conferences, which is ludicrous. We should be able to be in those spaces, but the level of accessibility is simply not there. Even if financially a conference is feasible, you also have issues of, conferences can be very crowded and loud, and not all conferences incorporate autistic communication into their messaging, like having a system of, this is how comfortable I feel interacting with people, like red, yellow, green, or having a quiet room, having a sensory room, whatever it may be. Those things are still not always there at conferences that are about autism, which is crazy. But it's starting to change, definitely. It's gotten much, much better. But overwhelmingly, it is still difficult for autistic adults to still access autism-centric spaces. And research, of course, is still largely focused on children with autism. Again, that's where I guess I sort of different there. My research interest has always been with autistic adults, knowing about the lack of supports and services. I have a master's degree in ABA, and for my thesis study, I looked at helping two adults on the spectrum, where I had to ask someone out on a date. And there was pretty much nothing for me to draw from the research literature at that time. So this was like 2010 when I was doing this. It is certainly better now. We are definitely seeing more research with autistic adults, but it is still not, there's still just not enough, especially older adults. As I was saying before, we have so little research focused on older adults. We have such an insignificant picture of aging and autism, and we need more of that. We desperately do. So let me just take a swig of water here. So one thing I think that a lot of people seem to miss, and that we see this a lot in how we talk about autism, how we talk about autistic people, and it's a very simple, basic thing. But an autistic adult is not the same thing as an autistic child, right? Oh, how many times I can tell you I've heard, I've had other autistic adults say to me, and I've had it said to me as well, by a parent of an autistic child, you have more in common with me than you do with my child, because their child is, has higher support needs and has, more significant challenges. But to have that said to me was one of the most hurtful things I think I've ever had said to me. But and again, it's that idea that if your autism doesn't look exactly the way that my child's autism looks, you're not autistic. It's a very invalidating thing to have people think that and say that. But I would hope that the challenges that I had when I was 11 years old and newly diagnosed as being on the spectrum would not be the same challenges that I have now as an adult. And they're not, right? But it doesn't mean those challenges go away. It means they're replaced by new ones. And all too often, however, you hear people engage in what I refer to as infantilization, which means referring to autistic adults as if they're children in big bodies, saying, oh, Tommy is 23 years old with the mentality of a 10-year-old. Well, no, Tommy's 23 years old with a mentality of a 23-year-old who happens to have his particular strengths, challenges, desires, needs, and so forth. He's 23. That doesn't go away just because he's autistic. So that kind of infantilization, however, tends to keep these discussions in the realm of childhood and prevents us from really seeing autistic adults as adults, which we are. So we'll go more into that in just a minute. But in thinking about the future, right? One of the biggest challenges is, how can people on the spectrum think about the future if no one believes that they can have one, right? It's what I often see happen is what I call what I refer to as autistic people existing under the burden of low expectations, right? It's either it tends to be actually either, okay, let me rephrase. So nobody has had higher expectations of me than I've had of myself. I hold myself to ridiculous standards. And that is not a good thing. It's also not a good thing that people historically have held me and other autistic people to very low standards, to thinking that someone will never achieve this, they'll never do that. But we kind of damn someone in either direction, right? It seems to be very difficult to set realistic expectations. And so for a lot of people, it's easier just to say, well, this person is just not going to really do anything. Let's just not have any expectations at all. And that's not the answer either. And that says to someone, whether you think they hear you or not, and I guarantee they hear you, that, it says to that person, we don't believe in you. We don't believe in you or your potential. That was overwhelmingly the messaging that I got growing up, which I will mention more of in just a moment. But one of the moments that I always remember the most vividly, is that when I was growing up, I was attending my own IEP meetings. I would say this was probably around middle school, maybe the beginning of high school. But I overwhelmingly remember that all the people in the IEP meeting, you had the director of special education, you had paraprofessionals, you had other staff, and of course my parents. Everybody was talking to everybody else in that meeting except for me. I might as well have been a potted plant for how much anybody talked to me in those IEP meetings. I don't know why I was there. And my most vivid memory, because these meetings were held at the administration offices, which were at the elementary school, was of looking out the window and seeing the sun shining and seeing the blacktop outside and hearing the kids playing outside and knowing that I wasn't out there with them. That is the most vivid memory I have of my IEP meetings. The loneliness, the feeling of, I don't have a place here. I don't have a place in this IEP meeting. I don't have a place with my classmates either. It was very, very, painful. But that's the most vivid memory I have. And the things, again, that the so-called experts were saying, these people who were paid to sit in these meetings and tell my parents, what was going on with me, were not good things. And I have a smattering of them in the next slide here. Amy is a very rigid, unimaginative youngster who is unable to understand the intricacies of interpersonal relationships. This was written in an assessment about me. I recently came across these. My mother, God love her, has a binder with every single assessment ever written about me that she has kept for the past 30 years. And I had never seen this before. And this was in there. The second thing was most of Amy's statements were quite factual, and she displayed no understanding of humor. Again, the thing that this was referring to, Amy displayed no understanding of empathy. Yeah, this is referring to is that my cat had apparently died, and the social worker, I think, who had interviewed me said, "I'm sorry," and my response was, "What do you have to be sorry for? You didn't kill her." And that's clearly a joke. And this person is telling me that I have no sense of humor. I think you're the one who doesn't have a sense of humor. But the thing of it is that there's an enormous responsibility that people in this position have. That when you write these things down, these statements become how other people see this child, right? Your words have such enormous power and weight. They become how potentially how this child's parents see them, and potentially how this child sees themselves. Now, fortunately, my parents did not take in everything that these experts were saying. They were very wise, and they still believed, in my potential. Despite being told by other people, Amy's not going to graduate high school. Amy's not going to go to college. She'll end up working in a sheltered workshop. Don't spend money on her. These were all things that my parents were told. And it's painful to me to read these things now, just in the sense of like that these professionals, these quote experts, could be so irresponsible with this type of language. There was another assessment I also read that talked about my appearance. It talked about my weight and my teeth, and like, what are you doing? Why are you writing about the body and the teeth of a 12-year-old girl? What is the thought process? Like, there is no way. It had nothing to do with anything medical. There was no reason for it. And these are the professionals. So this is shameful, but unfortunately this still continues, right? The experts are the people who have the greatest power. Even now, if you work on a multidisciplinary team, if you have a BCBA on your team, you have a social worker, you have an OT, what people write, sadly often becomes set in stone. It shouldn't, right? We don't do this, these statements as well. That's the other thing, is that these were written about me when I was 9 years old. These people decided who I was when I was 9. We don't do this with neurotypicals. We don't decide who someone is when they're 9 years old. but this is what was happening here. This is why this is so dangerous, right? And all of this, again, added to that problem and that challenge of thinking about the future. So, you know, the part of, I think, the challenge, again, in addition to the so-called expectations of the so-called experts, is that we get very focused on the day-to-day, right? And what we forget is that, you know, growing up is a lot of things. Growing up is finding out who you are. And that process of self-discovery and journey to self-awareness happened for me later, I think, than my neurotypical peers. I wasn't experiencing that in high school. Really, I had people telling me all day long who I was, you know, these experts telling me, well, you have a hard time with this, you're good at this, you're bad at this, you know, and it makes it very difficult to learn who you are. And then that in turn then makes it difficult to think about who you will become. You know, my only career aspiration at this particular point, well, I'll talk about that coming up. Never mind, ignore that. That's coming up. But you know, the other thing about this as well is that in this moment, we're often in what I call survival mode, right? We want to just get the autistic people that we support through the day. Like, let me just make sure that the kid is, you know, doing the work he needs to do, sitting where he needs to sit, eating what he needs to eat. But being in that constant day-to-day mode does not allow us to really think about the future actively. And so my very good friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Gerhardt, actually co-authored a book recently that with Dr. Shanna Bowery, which is about what is it about? It's about ABA, but it's about like reframing ideas about ABA and thinking about the future. It's definitely a huge component of this, and something that they notably say in the book. You know, a great example is like, you know, let's say you have a kid, you're trying to give them family responsibilities, right? Well, okay, what if Timmy's family responsibilities can be to walk the dog? And so that's something that you do day to day, but then that can lead into the thought of, oh, you know, Timmy is walking the dog. Maybe Timmy would like to have a dog when he lives in an apartment someday, right? So that's connecting something in the present to the future. Thinking about not just, you know, that day-to-day survival and surviving, but thinking about thriving, right? How do we engineer it so that autistic people are not just surviving now, but thriving in the future? That's how I try to look at it. And so what can you do, right? How can you help this to happen? I mean, we know that autistic people can have their lives planned from beginning to end, right? How often do we hear parents and others say, well, you know, it's easier if I just, you know, do that for him. But that's not how you make it possible for someone to live in the world when you're not here anymore, right? So another example, when I was in high school, I didn't know how to run my own shower until I was about 18, I would say. My dad always used to run it because I didn't know how to work the knobs and adjust the heat and the temperature. And then in my senior year of high school, I went on a class trip with one of the clubs I was part of to, I grew up on Long Island until we went to upstate New York to like Lake Placid or Lake George, whatever, Lake George. And I didn't know how to, you know, run my shower. So I didn't take a shower the whole weekend. And the kids bullied me, you know, because of it. So it was probably easier, sure, for my dad to do that for the longest time, but that's something I needed to know how to do. And if that wasn't something, you know, if that's not something that we think about and plan for, we're ultimately causing more harm to our children, to the people that we're supporting by doing these things for them, than helping us find a way for people to do these things themselves. And so if our lives are planned in this way, is it really our life or the one you chose for us, right? So going back to what I said at the beginning about what do you want your child to be when they grow up, every parent kind of has a vision of what they want their child's life to be like, you know, when they grow up. But what we forget is that we, as your child, as individuals, we have, you know, the right to choose our life too, whether we're autistic or not. And when we take that away, you know, we take away somebody's right to self-determination, which is so hugely important. We take away somebody's right to self-advocacy, which is a huge skill that people need to have to exist and survive and thrive in the world. So, you know, as hard as it is, as challenging as it can be, you know, I say this to parents all the time and to some professionals too, we got to let go and we got to let grow, right? So the kind of the worst thing you can do is instill in your child or client the fear of making a mistake, because everybody makes mistakes, right? The only way we learn how to get up is by falling down. And if you create an environment where somebody can't ever make a mistake, you create a person who becomes terrified of making a mistake. And that's not how we learn. That's not how we exist in this world when you're no longer here to support us. So, again, thinking about the future. So this is what I was alluding to earlier. My career goal at the age of 10, 11 was to write poetry in a cottage in the Italian Alps, not the Swiss Alps, mind you, the Italian Alps, because I'm Italian. So I was very specific on this point. But the problem with writing poetry in a cottage in the Italian Alps is that you do it alone. And so my vision of the future was of one in isolation, because I did not think I had anything to offer the world. I did not see a place for me in this world. Just because that was the messaging that I had received for so long up to that point from everyone around me, from my peers, from my teachers, from society overall. So that was all I saw of my future, kind of at that particular point. And that's again a lonely place to be in. So, but what I often talk about as well is this idea of autistic resilience, right? Which is that we as people on the spectrum are often characterized as being resilient, mostly, I think, but it's often because we're forced to be resilient, right? Not necessarily because we want to be or because we should have to be. It's because we're living in a world that is not built for people like us. And so, something in me, I think, kept me going, even though I became suicidal at the age of 10 because of the bullying I was experiencing. Something in me kept on going and kept on wanting to do what I said in my letter earlier, to get here to see what the future was going to be like, as difficult as it was to get to this point. So again, thinking about the future, this is another question that I like to ask to my audiences. You can answer in the chat if you want. You don't have to, totally up to you. What is something you need help with, right? We all need help with different things in this world, in this life. For me, a big one is cleaning. I hate to clean. I can't do it. The smell of the chemicals is very overwhelming for me. I don't like the loud noise of the vacuum. It's not for me. I don't like it. I categorically do not like it. And sometimes, what we do is spend a lot of time working on and trying to teach skills to do something that somebody just doesn't want to do, right? Something that we can simplify. So what do I do now? I have a cleaning lady, right? I have a lovely woman who comes every other month and cleans my apartment, and boom, problem solved, right? So, it took me a long time to figure out that was the best and easiest solution to that particular problem. And that it made infinitely more sense than me trying to tolerate the smell of the chemicals, trying to tolerate, being on my knees, scrubbing the bathroom floor. I do sweep up my kitchen, mind you, because I cook a lot. I'm not a complete slob. I do clean up after myself, but overall, for the whole thing, this wound up being the like Occam's razor, the simplest solution. So this brings us to what I like to refer to as, and what you may have heard of, interdependence, right? So that is what enabled me to get help with that particular chore, that particular problem. So, when we think about independence, right, we think about someone needing to do absolutely everything on their own. And nobody in this life does everything absolutely on their own. If you need clothes dry cleaned, you're not going to look up a YouTube tutorial and learn how to dry clean your own clothes. You're going to go to a dry cleaner, right? So we all have to know what we need help with. And the first step to that is knowing who you are, right? As I mentioned before, that is often a challenging problem for folks on the spectrum, figuring out who we are. That's the first piece, though. And knowing who you are also means accepting who it means not saying to yourself, well, yeah, I know this is something that I have a hard time with, but I just have to try and do better. Like, I'm a terrible person, because this is just a moral failing on my part. It's not a moral failing. It's not a moral failing on my part to be bad at cleaning. It's just who I am, So that was the first piece, was not letting the things that I struggle with define me as a person. And then moving to the next piece is knowing then what to ask for help with, right? So once you know who you are, then that piece is like, what do I ask for help with? What is it that I really, and then I know, because when I was younger as well, I always thought that it was bad to ask for help. I thought that that means I'm stupid. It means that there's something wrong with me. It's a sign of weakness. But actually asking for help is a sign of strength. Uh, as I was just saying, it means that you know who you are and you know that you need help with something and you're not afraid to address that. Um, and then the final piece then is knowing whom to ask for that help, right? So these are the kind of the three steps to that interdependence. And being able to get help, when you need help. That's kind of the biggest thing. Um, and so, but I think we often tend to conflate interdependency with codependency, and they're very much not the same thing. I want to be really clear on that. So codependency is characterized by a dysfunctional one-sided relationship where one person relies on the other for meeting nearly all of their emotional and self-esteem needs. Codependency is extremely unhealthy in most cases. It can be, pretty dangerous in a lot of ways. And so we don't want people to end up in a kind of a codependent relationship. That's something we want to kind of steer away from. And it's very much, again, like interdependence by contrast means mutual dependence, right? It means like, I depend on you to help me with this, you depend on me to help me with that. It's like, my parents have been married for 52 years and my father does the dishes, right? And then my mother cooks. So that's interdependence. Like, I depend on you to do this and you depend on me to do that. Of course, that's, shifted over time as well. My dad does some cooking now too. So it's an ongoing thing, interdependence, and negotiating and figuring out what you need help with and who to ask for that help from. So again, me at the age of 10, this is me on my first day of school. I would say about fourth or fifth grade. I'm not sure which one, but I wanted very much to be independent. I had this idea, I think, at 10 and 11 that I needed to do everything or I'd never do anything. Again, what I said before about having higher standards for myself than anyone else. And again, we also tend to put this expectation on autistic individuals that if someone doesn't do something or achieve a certain milestone by a certain age, that they're never going to do it. And that's not true, right? I mean, there are two timelines, right? There's the world's timeline and there's the individual's timeline. Each individual's timeline is different. And just because someone doesn't achieve something at the age the world thinks they should, doesn't mean they'll never achieve it at all. But I was feeling the burden of this pressure. And, I mean, I was only a kid, but I took so much onto myself. I often kind of refer to it as taking like the weight of the world onto me, which is literally represented in the form of that backpack that I'm wearing there, because I literally carried every single book I had in that backpack and I never put them down. I never put them in my locker, to the point where I developed mild scoliosis because of carrying this backpack around all the time. But that was kind of this metaphorical and literal weight that I carried upon myself. And feeling, feeling the expectations or lack thereof from the world around me, that people didn't think I was capable of things, and hating myself as a result of it, right? I hated myself for a very, very long time, and I blamed all of the things that I struggled with on my autism. I used to say that there was autism Amy and there was Amy. And if autism Amy would go away, everything would be great and fine and I'd be happy. I know that's not true now. I know there's just Amy. But that was my view of myself and my disability at that particular time. So again, continuing to think about, independence, interdependence, and planning for the future. What is something you couldn't do when you were younger, but now you can do? I know that there's a lot of these, right? And again, I bring this up because of what I just said about how we think that if someone can't do something when they're younger, that they'll never be able to do it. When I was a kid, I absolutely could not braid my hair. Under no circumstances, known to God or man, could I braid my hair. I just didn't know how. It's for some reason, it wasn't there in my head. And then one day, I don't know how, it was like a switch went off. One day when I think I was in college, I was either in college or in my 20s, I realized that I could braid my hair. I don't know what did it. I mean, I know our body chemistry changes every 7 years, maybe something went whack-a-hoodoo with my hormones or who knows what, but all of a sudden I could braid my hair. I cannot explain why to this day, but I never thought I'd be able to. And a big one, though, a really big one for me was packing my suitcase, right? This was something I could not do as a kid. And as a kid whose parents like to take lots of family vacations, that was a difficult thing. I mean, I hated traveling to begin with as a kid. It was very hard for me to travel anywhere because of all the change and, all of that stuff. But packing my suitcase, I was overwhelmed just even at the thought of it. And then as time went on, I figured out a system that worked for me. And I still use it now. I have bags, sliding lock bags. One of them says sleepwear. One of them says brassieres and underwear. One of them says personal care items. One says hair care products. So I have bags for everything. At least the things that will fit in there, like larger stuff. I know how to roll it in my suitcase now, and I know how to put my shoes and that I'd be able to do, right? And so that again to this point of the fact that autistic individuals can grow, right? We can change. We don't stay the same. And if we continue with that mindset, if we think that autistic people are always going to be what they are the day that we're diagnosed, that doesn't allow us to grow and become autistic adults, become adults, period. We like, I started off as that little caterpillar, that funky little caterpillar. That was me. And I was in that cocoon for a really long time. Right. And now I think I'm pretty much a butterfly, right? I mean, I'm flying, I'm flapping, but that took time, right? There's no kind of set thing on when somebody, is going to become the person that you think they should become. Instead of thinking about somebody becoming the person you think they should become, let that person become the person that they want to become. Let them become, let someone find out who they are, right? That seems to be a very difficult thing. But if I'd never been given the opportunity to grow and change, then I wouldn't have. But if my parents hadn't, paid for me to go to college, paid for my graduate school, if they hadn't paid for me to live in Seattle for 2 years, which I did after I graduated college, before graduate school, I wouldn't be the person that I am right now. All those experiences shaped me into who I am. But I needed people to give me those opportunities. So what happens next, right? As we talk about the future, I said this earlier and it still holds true. Challenges and problems don't go away when we get older, right? So those change too. As we as autistic people enter into the adult world, and whether it's that we're trying to negotiate getting a job, or whether we're trying to find a place to live, or trying to get into a relationship, those challenges become different to what we faced in childhood. Excuse me 1 second. Hello? Robocall. Sorry, folks. But just wasn't sure. So great question, Lacey. Thank you for that question. What sort of resources have you found helpful to develop skill sets, websites, books, people, apps, support groups? Again, I wish that I could point to something that really helped me as I was growing up. And there just wasn't. I'm sorry to say that as a child, as an autistic child, there wasn't anything that pointed to how do you become an autistic adult. I think what's overwhelmingly helpful now has been support groups, and also hearing from other autistic adults, right? Knowing that I'm not alone, because I also felt extremely alone when I was growing up. I didn't know any other autistic kids until I was like 14, maybe. And so to feel like you're the only one going through what you're going through is a very painful and lonely experience. But again, at that time, there just wasn't like the things that exist now. You have so much more now. I think you have things like Wrong Planet, which is a forum for people on the spectrum where people can talk and, share in their experiences. There are now dating sites for autistic adults. For friendship as well, friendship and dating sites, which just certainly didn't exist, when I was growing up. I had a wonderful guidance counselor who tried to help me with the transition from elementary to middle school. She introduced me to the middle school counselor and got me all prepared to meet with this woman. And then as soon as I went from elementary school to middle school, that counselor retired. So all that just went right out the window, you know. And so, and then I had a speech language pathologist who was wonderful at SLP, yeah, in high school, who tried to help me also prepare to go to college. She created a whole kind of guide to help me with going off to college. And I was actually great in college. I mean, I did a program the summer before my freshman year of college that was for students with disabilities, and I was homesick for all of one night, and then I never looked back. Um, so I was like super in college, but then now it's the adulting stuff that is, that presents its own challenges. I do have a job, I work at the Rutgers Center for Adult Autism Services as a relationship coach. I started that job in March of 2020, which is a very weird time to start a new job because I was there for 2 days and then it was spring break and then it was pandemic. And so I did not really officially start that job until October, November of 2021. That was when I first began to even meet my colleagues, other than my direct supervisor. So there are still hiccups even now, all these years later. I just finished designing a sex ed curriculum for adults on the spectrum. I received a grant in 2022 for $25,000 to develop this curriculum, my first grant as a principal investigator. That was a whole brand new thing that I had never done before and presented a host of all other challenges. So it continues. And again, I'm still not the best at asking for help. I think I beat myself up a lot because I often feel like, well, all the other employees know this stuff. Why don't I know this? And it's difficult. But I will say, oh yes, thinking of what's helped me, what's also helped is that I have autistic colleagues at the center as well, which I never had before. When I started off in 2020, I was the only autistic employee openly there. And now I have another, and we're actually about to run a workshop to train the staff at the center on how to support autistic colleagues. So that is a huge thing that I'm hoping will be helpful and beneficial to everyone, to the staff and to all of our neurodivergent employees. So I'll thank you for that question, and I really appreciate that. But again, the way that I always say to kind of address these challenges, all these challenges that I've been talking about, is to treat us like the adults that we are, not the children that we were, right? Again, I know that this is difficult, especially when I'm talking to parents. Parents, always want to see their child as their child, right? That's a function of being a parent. But very often, when I give presentations, I have parents come up to me afterward and say, I saw my child in you. I finally, thanks to you, I see my child as like a person, not just as my child. And I never was able to do that before. And so that's kind of the biggest thing is, like, my mother used to say, she would say my age with an asterisk next to it, meaning that I was my chronological age, but perhaps developmentally, I wasn't in the same place as my peers. And I don't consider that denigrating. I think that is accurate, but we also have to be careful, to not ascribe that to someone being immature necessarily, or to not being able to handle things the way that adults their same chronological age might. So my trajectory may not have been the same as my neurotypical peers, but it doesn't mean that it was less necessarily. It doesn't mean that my path was somehow inferior to their paths. It just means that it was my path. And I've had to take ownership of that, which has been a tremendously challenging thing. I still, I downplay myself all the time. I had one of my colleagues say to me the other day that I'm so dedicated and all this. And I was like, pishua, like I never want to rest on my laurels. That's just me. But it also, I think, makes it harder to step back and acknowledge what I have achieved. But I just, again, I'm always thinking about the autistic person coming up behind me who is trying to make it in this world, and what can I do to make their journey easier than mine was. And so yes, a big piece of that is making sure that we look at autistic adults as adults and look at people as capable of making choices about their own lives. And remember as well, that those experts are not always right? Those predictions, the things that people wrote about me when I was 9 years old, that didn't determine who I am. A diagnosis tells us what we have. It doesn't tell us who we are. that's the thing I think we forget a lot, is that people assume a diagnosis is destiny, and it's not. It's an important thing to have, and it certainly adds to the framing of how we view the world and how we function and exist in the world. But a label doesn't dictate who someone is as a human being. And certainly those so-called experts didn't know me as a human being. They were looking at me as a diagnosis. They were looking at me, as a list of criteria, not Amy Gravino, you know, and that I think that contributed to me as well, not really knowing who Amy Gravino was, because everything that I was squelched down and pushed down for so long. So I'm kind of like the little flower that's trapped under the snow for months and months in the winter, but I'm blooming, baby. I finally got out of the snow. Took me a long time. And there was snow in this PowerPoint too, so that's very fitting. I have to say, bravo me for thinking of that. But so, and again, another thing to think about as well is that there are many autistic people who are parents themselves, right? So when I was diagnosed at the age of 11, my father, this is my father here, this is me about age 3 in my cute little tights. My father kind of started looking at his life through a new lens and realizing that he was autistic too, but he was never diagnosed. And to this day, he still thinks he's too old to be diagnosed. I don't think so. But we all too often, so many autistic adults get diagnosed when their children become diagnosed, right? And the spaces that I mentioned earlier, the autism spaces that exist that were created by parents, those are neurotypical parents largely. So oftentimes many autistic parents don't feel like they have a place to get support either, that they don't necessarily fit in with autistic spaces of people who are not parents, even though they may be autistic, but then they don't fit into spaces that are geared toward parents, but those parents are neurotypical, right? So that's something that we have to consider as well. And thinking about autistic people who want to become parents, or like, what is the goal that someone might have? Someone might not just have a goal of, I want to live in an apartment and I want to work at this place. They might also have a goal of, I want to get married someday and I want to have a child. And like, that's all part of the future, right? That's all something that we have to think about, and what it means to be an autistic parent of a child, whether that child is neurotypical or on the spectrum. So, the kind of the takeaway points from today's talk, the things I hope that you'll take with you after we've finished our time here together, is the importance of including autistic people in discussions about the future, right? Everything that we just said. It's not just kind of the formal discussions either, the ones that happen around the dinner table or that happen in an IEP meeting. It's the things you say when you think somebody can't hear what you're saying, right? Because very often, the way that you talk about somebody when you think that they can't hear you is the way you think about them when they are there in front of you. And so we have to reframe kind of our view of autism and the future, right? How do we make it so that this individual, whether this autistic individual has minimal support needs or higher support needs, how do we include them in these discussions about the future? How do we make sure that they understand that we believe in them and we believe that they can have a future in the first place? Because that's not always a given. Like I said, it's just not. And then kind of again what I said about the interdependence versus independence, right? Making sure that we focus on this idea of, how to not this idea of how do we make sure somebody can do absolutely everything by themselves, totally 100%, but how do we make sure somebody knows how to get help with the things they need help with? How do we make sure someone is able to accomplish the tasks they need to accomplish, even if they can't do them themselves, right? And ensuring that someone knows that they're not less than if they can't do something themselves, right? Because nobody can do everything all by themselves. That's a simple fact. But we don't tend to deride neurotypicals for not being able to do everything 100% themselves. Again, if I need an oil change for my car, I'm not changing my own oil. Heck no, I got to take it to the shop and know how to say I need an oil change, right? That's interdependence. That's an important thing to keep in mind. And then finally, to remember that yesterday doesn't define tomorrow, right? We, thinking about what I said before about how we get focused on the day to day, and oh, my kid had a really bad day today, and he wouldn't, sit still in class, and he was getting overwhelmed and overstimulated, and he couldn't do these math assignments. And so I guess that means he's not going to get into Yale and he's not going to become, a computer programmer. Like that's, everybody's allowed to have a bad day, right? Neurotypicals get to have bad days, but those bad days don't define their entire future. As well as the fact that, when we think about like passions and special interests, right? Neurotypicals are allowed to have passions. Autistic people have special interests. But a neurotypical person's entire future is not predicated on stripping them of their passions. So we don't need to strip autistic people of everything that makes them who they are, who we are, in order for us to have a future. What we want is for autistic people to grow up to be the best version of themselves that they can be. And that means as an autistic adult, as a person in this world, trying to thrive and be successful in a world that's not built for people like us. So, as I said again at the beginning, happiness is not something that you postpone for the future. It's something you design for the present. I love this quote. I wanted to have this here to kind of close this out because, like I said, this is what we're ultimately talking about, is we want to ensure that autistic people are happy and safe and thriving in this world. And that's something that we have to engineer. We cannot assume that happiness is always going to happen because that's not often the story for many of us. So when we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about happiness, and we have to be mindful of that all the time. So thank you all so much for your time and attention. This is my contact information. If you scan the QR code with your phone, it'll take you to my social media, a page to follow my social media stuff. And now we can go to questions. So thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. Can you hear me? I'm using headphones now. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, when you held that up, I could hear you. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just making sure. So thank you so much for this presentation. And we did have a comment in the chat from Megan. I'm not sure if you're able to see that, but she said,
Yes.
thank you so much for sharing such a personal message. So touching. So sorry you had such a tough time when you were younger. You are amazing. I've learned so much from you in your presentations, which I think
Thank
that's a consensus from anyone who's ever listened to you speak, Amy. And then we also have Joy Jerkovic. I'm sorry if I'm butchering your last name. But she raised her hand, or they raised their hand, so I'm gonna allow them to talk,
you. Okay.
and they should be able to use their microphone. And if you have a question, Joy, or a comment, feel free to go ahead and speak. Or maybe you accidentally raised your hand because you just lowered it very quickly. If you have a question, Joy, feel free. But we did have a question in the chat from Lacey, which I think you kind of already addressed it, the sorts of
I did. Yeah.
resources. Yeah. Does anyone else have any questions or